welcome back to the Münster Podcast. Wow, what a week it has been for politics. I don't even know where to really start. I think, okay, how about a very good starting point is probably thank you for everybody that joined us in our, what was basically, frankly, a really large and monstrous, exhausting stream covering just the first night of the presidential elections that were happening in the United States. Thank you for the people that joined. Obviously, we weren't expecting, you to stay the entire time because we did stream for around 6 hours straight. It was a lot of fun. It was genuinely a lot of fun. I think the other people in the other hosts really enjoyed it. I know Ben definitely enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot too, but if you ever do go back and watch that video, in the last hour or so, I'm actually asleep, and this is my fault, and I think I let down the other guys, but I did sort of cut it off kind of ungracefully without a proper outro, so I will amend that when I do get around to making a kind of edit of the best moments of that live stream, which I still haven't figured out how to do because I'm still a novice at video editing and other things like that, despite sort of making videos and editing videos for pretty much my entire life. So I'll have to figure out how to take a stream and cut it up into the parts I want. Anyhow, so yeah, thank you so much for joining us on that stream. Now, in the stream I did make the prediction that Joe Biden was going to win. Ben and Isaac said that Trump were going to win, but here you go. Joe Biden is now the new president of the United States, and my prediction was right. Although, to be fair to them, there were two options really. It's a 50-50 chance, and if I'm honest, people, if you predicted Joe Biden or Donald Trump, I think it wasn't too unsensible. And I think from what we saw in the election, the massive voter turnouts, it was absolutely extraordinary, and it just shows how close it was, despite towards the end when the mail-in votes did start coming in, and it did look a bit more conclusive that Joe Biden had achieved victory. The kind of hesitation towards that and the kind of doubt that was kind of arising because of the sheer amount of Trump voters really shows that, let's be honest, the kind of 71 million or so Donald Trump voters, the fact that there were 71 million Trump voters, that is almost the same population as the United Kingdom. Okay, this is a lot of voters. So it just shows how big of the competition was. This wasn't a landslide victory. This wasn't a complete pushover. This was a real uphill struggle for Joe Biden. Now, anyway, so there you go. That's the intro. I went on a bit of a tangent there about the votes, which I will talk about later. But yeah, today's episode, I just wanted to discuss firstly the election campaign, Donald Trump's legacy. I think will be interesting. I will touch on that, but I feel like we'll do an actual episode about that later with some other people, possibly Ben, Isaac, Daffyd, Alfie, even some other people. We'll get them in. We'll talk about Donald Trump's legacy because I think that there's a bit of discussion about that. But I'll give my 2 cents today, and then I'll also talk about personally my opinions of the election, how it went down, the kind of controversies that arose from it, what I think of those controversies and conspiracies and all those things. And I will also give my opinion on Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and what we should be expecting of Joe Biden's presidency. So we'll start with the first point, which was my opinion of the election. So to be fair, for the 6 hours that we were streaming, an hour I was like in and out sleeping. To be completely honest, I'm not very good, at staying awake late. It's not something I do. I am like an old man and like a toddler combined. I sleep like a log. So yeah. So to be honest, there was not too many shocks. I think when the states were getting the votes in and the state allegiances were changing, there were a few shocks. But in the end, I think every state voted pretty much in line, as in their final vote, pretty much in line to what people were kind of predicting. Now, there were a few hiccups. Georgia, for example, was a very notable hiccup. Obviously, that handed Biden the presidency. Michigan was another area of contention, and Texas was close to being one of those areas. Luckily for the Republicans, they managed to really take control of that once all the votes started coming in. Another area, North Carolina too. Now, these areas are always changing anyway, but Georgia was the main kind of shock for Donald Trump. And really what the sort of voting patterns show is that Trump has really lost support in urban areas. Now, normally Republicans gain plenty of support from rural areas and less so from urban areas, because obviously urban areas tend to be areas where there's a lot of young voters, a lot of ethnic minorities. It tends to also be a lot of poorer people too, and obviously a lot of them vote Democrat. Now, that isn't to say that there isn't usually a healthy amount of Trump supporters in these areas, but I think the low turnout of Republican voters in these urban areas, particularly in Georgia, for like Atlanta was a huge Democrat stronghold there. I think that shows that Trump, seriously, his decisions during still occurring, but the kind of, when they started, the Black Lives Matter protests. I mean, I said this earlier to some other people who asked me who I thought was going to win. That has genuinely been detrimental to his presidency, because not only has it convinced some moderates to vote Democrat because of how monumental and how popular these protests were, whether you agree or disagree with them, they have been incredibly successful in getting people to join their side. The problem that Trump faced with these protests is the destruction of private property, private businesses, and just the general unrest that urban Republicans really hate. I mean, I'm sure anyone hates them anyway, but most private business owners, small business owners, self-employed, in urban areas, they are most likely going to be Republican, particularly in areas like, again, Georgia. But when these riots happened, and Trump did deploy, in some areas he deployed the troops, in some places he armed the police with more equipment, more weaponry, National Guard was called in some areas, it just wasn't effective. I can't tell you exactly why it wasn't effective, but it just genuinely wasn't effective. So this isn't really a case of did Trump take adequate action. It's more like a case of he took the action to stop the riots, but it didn't work. And as a result, and many Republicans are most likely thinking, look, this is supposed to be our Republican president. He's not meant to stand for this kind of civil unrest. And here he is in the White House, or the basement of the White House, on Twitter saying law and order over and over again. And then the one time he does emerge from the bunker, he comes out, moves a bunch of protesters, and takes a photo. He has a photo shoot with a Bible. And so not only did this act enrage plenty of Democrats, because mostly Democrat voters were supportive of the Black Lives Matter protests, and most of the people who were supportive of those protests were also they didn't necessarily support the rioting, but they saw the kind of purpose and the reason for the rioting. And obviously they also reject the idea that the military can use force to close down protesters and things. They didn't like that kind of authority. So it obviously angered Democrat voters, but it also angered Republican voters who were probably expecting a little bit more from their president. So I think that was really important. I mean, Trump was really unlucky there, okay? I personally don't like him, but you've got to hand it to him. He was genuinely very unlucky with those riots happening when they did. Could he have taken better action to stop those riots? Possibly. And he definitely probably could have saved a few votes by doing two things. One of them is to appease the protesters, and he probably would have saved a few moderates. And the other one is to genuinely actually crack down and stop the riots full stop, which he couldn't do. Okay? Maybe he tried to do it, but let's be honest, from the media perception and the kind of sort of messages and shockwaves coming through social media and other media outlets, and just the general perception of how he handled the riots, it didn't work. Whatever he tried to do, it did not work. So in that, in my opinion, was really detrimental to him. Okay. Also, this COVID situation also came at a very bad... I mean, 2020 has been a terrible year for a lot of people, but you've got to have some sympathy for Donald Trump. He was seriously riding a huge wave of momentum, and then 2020 happened. It started off great for him. He assassinated Soleimani, and then it just went downhill from there. Okay, so a lot of these COVID sort of crackheads that you're seeing in the United States, the Republican ones, they're coming out the protests with their, huge rifles, and they're coming out in their tactical vests and everything, and like armored vehicles and things. They don't want to wear masks and stuff. That is, and I hate to say it, but that is a vocal minority of Republicans. Okay, Trump has scared off a lot of moderate Republicans through how he has dealt with the COVID sort of crisis. Okay. And I don't mean through acts such as him saying, oh, let's inject bleach into our veins, because, look, most moderate Republicans know that Trump is an idiot, okay? People aren't stupid. They know what he's like. No one's actually going to do that, okay? It's not for comments like that push them away. It's the kind of dismissal of the COVID pandemic that has pushed those moderate Republicans away from Trump. And as a result, combine that with the riots currently taking place and the kind of lack of action being taken by the president, and you're going to get a huge shift of moderate Republicans, particularly young ones, moving away and saying, look, you're just not a good leader anymore, and you've let us down, you've let small businesses down, you've let the economy down, you've let healthcare workers down, you've let us all down. And that is most likely why Donald Trump lost the election. I don't think, okay, I see a lot of things, what people are saying to me, and things I see on Twitter and other, critics, particularly The Guardian as well. Loads and loads of sort of joy about Joe Biden being president, because this represents a new wave of progressive politics coming into the White House. It represents a moment of change in the United States. This kind of wave of 80s Christian conservatism is finally going to stop, and we're going to see a shift, kind of what Obama was trying to do. We're going to see that shift, and we're going to do what Clinton couldn't do, and it's a new political revolution, basically. And it really isn't, okay? For the points that I just said about Trump's own mistakes, or, straight up incompetence to prevent the problems that happened in 2020, because of the reason that Joe Biden has won, which I firmly believe is because of Trump's mistakes, not necessarily because of a shift in political and social views. It's not going to be, you're being way too optimistic in thinking that this is going to be a huge era of political liberalism and sort of a rejection of social conservatism and Christian-based conservatism. That is very optimistic. Once again, I think Joe Biden has won because he is the least worst candidate from the two. Particularly, that idea is even, is inflated by the fact that Trump has made recent mistakes. I mean, Trump has made plenty of mistakes throughout his presidency. Some of them have been absolutely dreadful. I've talked about this in an episode before. His support of Erdogan, the president of Turkey, the dictator of Turkey, let's be honest, his supporter of Modi in India, and his sort of him not protecting the ethnic Kurds in Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, leading to plenty of wars, plenty of discrimination, and even potential genocide in the region. He's made plenty of mistakes like that, but they're all from last year or the year before, and people have short-term memories, okay? But what happened in 2020 lives on, okay? And that is what changed the tide for Trump. As a result of that, I'm going to say it one more time, as a result of that, I seriously don't think that there is going to be a huge political change. Things are going to stay equally as divided as they were 4 years ago when Clinton ran for president. These are going to be very interesting times for American, just Western politics in general. So this isn't necessarily, so a lot of people are hailing this election as a rejection of Christian conservatism, and to that I say no. In my opinion, it's really not. It's just, again, least worst candidate, mistakes of Trump, fresh in your fresh memory, fresh in your mind, and it's caused moderate people to sway one way or another, particularly in urban areas. So there you go. There's my opinion on the election. Okay, so now we'll move on to a bit of a reflection of Donald Trump's presidency. I think overall it's been a very nothing presidency. Now, there's a lot of people who will highly disagree with that opinion. But really, Trump's presidency has, in American sort of history and also geopolitics too, it's been very stagnant. Now, I know a lot of people who are very anti-Trump. I know a few who will probably immediately disagree with me, but really, there's been no gains for any social group in particular, and no, not even straight white men. And it's been an incredibly stagnant 4 years for the United States. This isn't like under Barack Obama, where we saw, some changes in social change. We saw some progress for, sexual minority groups, ethnic minority groups. Although it was very little, we did see some. And then we saw some progress in terms of the war on terror. So Obama was obviously responsible for the assassination of bin Laden. And again, it's still quite stagnant. And although the economy did recover a little bit following the 2008 recession, Trump, however, I feel like it's been very stagnant. That's not to say it's good nor bad, but I think what it really encompasses is an era of sort of stagnant, politics for the United States. And the United States as a civilization has to be incredibly careful with what happens next, okay? Because what you tend to see in history with civilizations like this is that they have an era where they have huge expansion. So we saw that in the United States in the 19th century, they're manifesting their destiny. Then they see an era where they seriously boom and they assert themselves onto the world stage, and we saw that in the 1920s, although the 1930s did see a bit of a dip for the United States. But then into World War II, the United States emerged as the world's greatest power, made even stronger after the Soviet Union collapsed in the 90s, okay? Because we are truly living in an era of, Pax Americana. So before you had Pax Britannica, and then before that you had, God knows, right? But, this is an era of American hegemony, right? But it's eras like this where there's stagnation. I mean, we saw it in something like the Roman Empire, okay? And Roman Empire, Mongol Empire, eras where there's stagnation. Civilizations have to be very, very careful of what happens next, because what follows stagnation is collapse. Okay, I think the Mongol Empire is a fantastic example of this. Genghis went, and then there was a era of stagnation, and then the warlords were like, "Oh, screw it, we're just going to take apart this empire because there's no progress being made." Now, sometimes there isn't much progress to be made. Again, we'll go back to the Mongol Empire one. I mean, what else could they have actually done? They'd already conquered the entire world. There wasn't really much to do except divide it up and fight each other. But for places like the United States, I think there's still plenty of room for progress. I think there's still plenty of room for becoming an even stronger world power, especially now that their position as sort of world hegemon is being contested by Russia and China. Okay, especially, their economic strength in the world is being contested by China as well. So I think there is still a lot of room to improve upon. So this isn't really a situation where it's like post-Genghis, where it's just like, fuck it, just die, right? It's not like that. We're not at that stage yet, but they have to be careful they don't really enter that. Perhaps that is a bit of a dramatic analysis of it, but I think Trump's presidency and sort of the tail end of Obama's presidency really shows that kind of stagnation. Now, the counter-argument to this idea would be that under Trump, a fair amount of foreign policy has developed, for better or for worse. Obviously, a really good example, two really great examples of this, is his historic meeting with the Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un of North Korea, and also something that I think went under the radar, the peace deal with the Taliban. I thought that was incredibly monumental, very historic, considering America's last 20, 30, 40 years in that part of the world. That is hugely historic. I don't think enough people acknowledge those 2 points and how important they are. Okay, So I think that's definitely something to consider when it comes to contesting the idea of being a stagnant presidency. But then when we look back into the United States and see how people, actual Americans have progressed, I'm going to be completely honest, there hasn't been. Okay, so Trump spent a lot of his presidency trying to undo a lot of what Obama had done, and as a result, there wasn't really a lot of space for improving the lives of the majority of American citizens. I don't think Trump really got to realize his dream, and he will never, because his presidency has been cut short. But because of that, I don't think it's been quite stagnant. If you're an American, I don't think an American now in 2020 would be like, wow, things are so much better than they were 20 years ago. I think things have stayed relatively the same, and the effects of the 2008 recession are still there. Neither Obama or Trump, let's be honest, have really been able to solve it, because poverty in America and the wealth gap just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. So there's that. That being said though, unemployment has steadily decreased under Trump's presidency, but that tends to be part of a larger trend because that had already been happening under Obama's administration. So I don't necessarily attribute that to Donald Trump's presidency before somebody brings that up. The next point obviously is for ethnic minorities under Donald Trump. Again, whilst Trump individually, there are cases to say, like, this is an incredibly bigoted, incredibly xenophobic, incredibly racist man. There's plenty of, decent cases for that, and obviously towards other demographics we will get onto. I don't think life has necessarily got better or worse for African Americans under Trump, and it's life for African Americans is more or less, in terms of their economic prosperity, is more or less the same than what it was, in the 90s when we saw kind of a revival in interest in African American politics during the Rodney King riots and the LA riots. I wouldn't necessarily think that things have changed since then, and obviously the biggest indicator of that is the Black Lives Matter protest. Now, look, you can agree or disagree with the protest, but my main point, once again, is it shows that there has not been any progress. Okay, a lot of people that believe that Obama was going to champion African Americans into this new era, I think you've been misguided purely on the basis that under Trump we've seen that things really haven't got better. African Americans have a reason to protest, and as a result we have this. Okay, what about women under what about women? What a segue. Again, I don't think much has changed either. Again, this has been an era of stagnation. Don't let the fact that Barack Obama was an African American fool you that there was plenty of progress, because millions of African Americans are still struggling in the kind of institutions in the United States. So education and the prison system are the two largest ones, and they're still dealing with sort of brutality and oppression from the police. Don't let the fact that Barack Obama was black convince you that this has not been an era of stagnation. In my opinion, it absolutely has been an era of stagnation. Sorry, tangent over. Women. Again, not a lot has really changed. No additional rights, no additional guarantees. Nothing's really been taken away from them. The discussion with abortion now has come back with the death of, with the replacement of Supreme Court Justice, which was basically Donald Trump's last major act. So that will come back into debate. Roe versus Wade, that case will also come back into contention. But up until that point, I think it's been relatively stagnant for women once again. I mean, there has been plenty of social upheaval in terms of the Me Too movement. But once again, I don't think, although it has, rightfully singled out many, predators and all sorts of terrible people inside the system, particularly the entertainment industry. Again, I don't think life as a woman has necessarily got better under Trump. Things have stayed relatively the same. So, again, it's similar to the African Americans. I mean, will a woman in 2020 compared to 1990 really be saying, look, wow, my life is so much better because things have progressed. Again, it's quite stagnant. I mean, some people will argue that there's no reason to be upset that it's been stagnant because in all technicality, women have the exact same rights as men and all that. But obviously in practice, things can be a bit different. And if you're a woman, you can get, raped or murdered or kidnapped or all these terrible things. And they still happen quite a bit. It's still an epidemic, really. So let's be honest. Again, for women, their position hasn't changed. So we'll move on to sexual minorities, members of the LGBT community, transgender people as well. All these people, LGBT community is huge, and it's getting bigger in terms of who's allowed, not who's allowed, but who's counted as LGBT, etc. So non-binary and all that stuff. Again, it's been an era of stagnation. They've not received particularly any extra rights under Trump. There was the very controversial sort of decision to ban transgender people from joining the military. And I mean, I'm not really going to state my opinions about that right now, but that is, for the LGBT community, a step backwards because for whatever reason, they're not recognised as being fit for military service, which, if we're being fully non-discriminatory, then surely they should be allowed in. Well, I think I just said my opinion, but there you go. So I think that's been the main sort of standout moment for the LGBT community. But once again, no additional rights. Not a lot has been necessarily stripped away, because if we're going to be brutally honest, the amount of people that join the military who are transgender was already incredibly low. And people that generally join the military is incredibly low. So if we're talking the literal effect, it's quite low. So obviously the banning of transgender people in the military implies a much larger problem, which obviously that's what people are saying. But if we're talking the literal effect, again, it's been stagnant. So across most demographics, it's been incredibly stagnant. There's not been a lot of growth. There's not been a lot of progress. In some areas, for example, the LGBT community, it's even been a step backwards. So if you're from any of those demographics, you're probably going to think, wow, life under Trump has been terrible. However, not everybody is a gay African American who is transgender and is a woman. What about the majority of the population who are white Americans? Start off with poor white Americans, working class white Americans. Oh, there isn't a group that has been more stagnant than working class white Americans. The recession, the effects are still there. People are still poor and unemployed and unhappy. Okay, that's the key word there, just unhappy. Once again, because it's stagnant, there's not been a huge influx of jobs. I mean, that's what Trump's kind of aim was, main aim as president was. Bring all the jobs from China back to the United States and provide all these disgruntled working class white people with jobs. And he started doing it, but let's be honest, didn't really finish it, because guess what? They're still pissed off that they don't have jobs that they're happy with. And then the wealth gap just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So people are starting to ask questions. So once again, if you're a working class white American, it's pretty stagnant. What about middle class white Americans? Again, it's been completely stagnant. Now, there are plenty of arguments to say that they have gained a lot, because as a general rule, middle class citizens tend to be fairly stable, but the effects of the 2008 recession are still with us, and every demographic was hit incredibly hard by the recession, especially middle class families, middle class workers, white collar workers, professionals, all that stuff. Again, era of stagnation for the middle class. There have been some gains in certain areas, but on the whole, it's been incredibly stagnant. Now, the only area where it's really progressed is the upper class, but I think as a general rule, the upper class always makes some sort of progression unless there's some sort of violent, revolution or like civil war or something like that. So as a general rule, I think the upper class, that's just a given. But for everyone else, it's been quite timid in terms of their gains. That being said, I don't think I also disagree with the idea that it's been a very dramatic era for these groups. So for Americans, because I've named off every pretty much more or less every demographic of Americans, apart from certain ethnic minorities. People have been very dramatic and said, look, it's been an era, it's been terrible for all these people. But if I'm going to be completely honest, it could have been a lot worse. I don't think it's been good. I will agree with you that it's not been good, but I disagree that it's been that dramatic. Because Trump's character, whatever you think of it, so whether you think he's the second coming of Hitler or whether you think he's just a joke, okay, his character doesn't necessarily reflect into the way people are affected, okay? And a lot of the issues that are coming up under Trump's presidency have been an issue in the United States since the dawn of time. Since the founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence, these issues have been around. This isn't something you can attribute to just Trump. And then the question marks are raised about Obama. Why didn't you fix any of these? And it's like, well, you couldn't really fix any of these because this is the status quo. And, if you're a politician, you could have remained to the status quo. Okay, we're rambling on a bit, but there you go. That's my opinion of Donald Trump's presidency. I thoroughly nothing his presidency. Now, does that necessarily mean that I have sympathy for Trump? Does that mean I like him? Do I think he's like quirky or something? Am I trying to say this to sound intelligent or something? No, I dislike Trump a lot. I think he's as a kind of image for America, he's been terrible, and there's plenty of pejoratives that I can throw at him right now that I can think of because I don't think he's a particularly nice guy either. There you go. If that's what you wanted to hear, there you go. I dislike Trump. Please don't egg my house. So there you go. Donald Trump's presidency, I thoroughly nothing it. There you go. I think some of the biggest mistakes have come in terms of his relationship with Turkey and the Kurds. That one really makes me feel quite passionate about the opposition towards Trump. But in the end, I think any American president would have done that because Turkey is such an important part of American foreign policy. But again, we are rambling a little bit here. And we'll move on to the third and final part of this episode. What can we expect of Joe Biden? Joe Biden, sleepy Joe Biden. What can we expect from this man? And, well, unfortunately, Joe Biden supporters, in my opinion, not going to be a lot of fireworks, okay? As I just explained for the last sort of 15 minutes, it's been an era of stagnation. Not a lot has really happened. And I can genuinely see the exact same thing happening from Joe Biden. And nothing affirms my belief that this will be an era of stagnation more than his appointment of Kamala Harris as Vice President to the United States. Now, you might think, well, Charles, we've never had a female president or vice president or a South Asian, or an African American as vice president, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we will see progress. As we saw under Obama, President Barack Obama, the amount of progress was probably not as expected. There was probably more progress under Kennedy, a straight white man, than there was under Barack Obama. That's just the unfortunate truth. Again, it's not necessarily down to the individuals and their own personal beliefs, what they come to represent, and all those fancy things that you can say at me. In the end, this is an era of stagnation for these Western nations politically. Furthermore, Kamala Harris, for most of the people that are incredibly hateful of Trump and are incredibly happy about Donald Trump being kicked out of the White House, and they're very happy about Joe Biden being the new president, I don't think you actually realize what kind of a person Kamala Harris is. So, for those of you that don't know, here's a quick rundown of sort of what she stands for. I mean, she's very supportive of the police, in its current state, by the way. She's not supportive of a utopian version of the police. She supports the police as it is right now. She supports the kind of corporate prison system that has jailed a disproportionate amount of African Americans compared to white Americans. So, a potentially racist state there, potentially racist institution. And she doesn't support the legalization of drugs such as cannabis, which okay, Percy, I don't do drugs. Okay, I don't really see. It's not really my sort of thing, basically. Okay. However, the reason that I support the legalization of these drugs is not because I want more people to do them. It's because I don't think that the punishment for doing these drugs is to go to jail for the amount of time that people do get sent to jail for. Furthermore, African Americans disproportionately get arrested and charged with possession or doing these drugs, which is completely unfair. And she upholds that system as she has done her entire career as a lawyer. So you've really got to think, these white women posting these things on Instagram about how happy they are about Kamala Harris. You really got to think, do you actually like this person? Because 2 months ago you were posting infographics, pastel-coloured infographics about the Black Lives Matter movement, about how you hate the institutions that run the United States because they're all racist, they're all terrible. Do you actually support Kamala Harris? Because this is genuinely the funniest thing that's happened this year. And a lot of terrible things have happened. A lot of funny things have happened. Like, actually think about this for a second, white women. I'll give that to you. So, yeah. So not only is this era a very stagnant era, you're probably sick to death of me hearing that. But once again, not only is this era an incredibly stagnant era, but the appointment of a vice president who will basically enforce the status quo just reinforces how stagnant this is going to be. Joe Biden's presidency is definitely, in my opinion, going to be an era of transition. I don't see Joe Biden as being a particularly, charismatic, amazing, fantastic man. He's just a very normal, nothing guy. He's also kind of creepy. So, again, he's not perfect. He's not really a Barack Obama where, despite it being an era of stagnation, him as a figure was this kind of beaming light of hope for many Americans, and he'd go to other countries and he'd be this really cool and awesome president that'd be really popular and he had a great smile and whatever. Joe Biden isn't really that. I know he's his vice president. The Joe Biden that we're getting now in 2020 is a completely different Joe Biden to what we saw under Barack Obama. He's very old now. He's like 79 or something. He's having obviously this was inflated by Republicans, but potentially mental health issues with like dementia or something. So, I mean, surely that just encapsulates it all. I mean, think of it this way, for those of you that watch football. The Gareth Bale that has returned to Tottenham Hotspur now is not the same Gareth Bale that left them in like 2012 or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Okay, this is what Joe Biden is like. Okay, this is a completely different person. As a result, era of stagnation. I don't think a lot's going to get done. It's definitely going to be an era of transition where Joe Biden really prepares the White House for whoever comes next. Preferably, obviously, he'll prepare it in favor of a Democrat, and then we'll see somebody like Elizabeth Warren try running again. Pete Buttigieg running again. I think Pete Buttigieg has a very decent chance of being a favorite front runner for the Democrat sort of presidential thing if Joe Biden doesn't make it. If Joe Biden doesn't make it by 2024, it'll be Pete Buttigieg. Mark my words. I've just said this on the 11th of the 11th, 2020. The time is now 20 minutes to 4. Pete Buttigieg, he will be next. I'm telling you, he will be next after Joe Biden does something stupid in his presidency and he's like, well, I guess I won't be president anymore. It'll be him. Pete Buttigieg. Trust me. But yeah, that is what I think. That is what I think is going to come from Joe Biden's presidency. Frankly, nobody can really predict what's going to happen because this is the United States, one of the most volatile countries in terms of politics in the world. And it's Joe Biden, and it's Trump who won't accept the presidency. So, era of stagnation. It's not going to be fireworks instantly. In fact, it might not even be fireworks at all. I seriously don't think that Democrats who have been, dancing in the streets. This is really weird, by the way. When you see Americans celebrate elections, they just do it in the strangest way possible. Like they get in the streets and they do a choreographed dance and stuff. Like, dear Americans, it looks really stupid. You look like complete idiots. Okay, particularly when the Democrats celebrate, because obviously the Republicans do the weird thing where they get on their knees and pray to the building and okay, that's really weird too. But when the Democrats, when you have all these like pink-haired, like really fat women like dancing, they're doing this like choreographed dance in like fluorescent pink leggings. It looks really dumb. Okay, it looks really stupid. Thank God that Americans tend to stay in America and they don't come to Europe, because it just looks so stupid. Again, words cannot describe. But yeah, for those people who are really anticipating a really enthusiastic Charles to tell you that things are going to be great under Joe Biden, it's not. It's going to be the same. You're going to be disappointed. You got excited over pretty much nothing. And in the end, you really only have yourself to blame, because when Joe Biden appointed Kamala Harris, we should have just accepted our fates that this is, in the end, politics, and they've got to appease certain groups. So there you go. There's my opinion about the election. There's my opinion about Donald Trump's presidency, and a little bit about what I think of Donald Trump as an individual. And then there's a little bit about what I think is to come from Joe Biden. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And once again, thank you for listening to the Münster Podcast. It's a bit of an abrupt ending, isn't it? But there you go. Thank you so much for watching. I've been your host, Charles, and hopefully I will see you in the future, because we may not see Joe Biden in the future, because he is incredibly old. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.